Oh, how's everyone? Good, good. Let's see, we'll just take a few more minutes just to give people a chance to join us. In the meantime, let me see if I could share my screen, or that I'm prepared to share my screen at some point. Let's see. All right, it's good to see everyone. Okay, this is welcome all. This will be I believe it's our sixth gathering of Shakespeare for today. And unfortunately, it will be our last gathering for the academic year. I want to first thank Leah Anasato for participating in all of the gatherings, and also I'd like to thank Ruth Triplett for participating as well. She's brought so much to our conversations. I really appreciate her. So what we'll do today, what I'll do is I'll first, as usual, I'll read the prompt for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the prompt, and then I will turn things over to Leah, and we will engage as efficiently as we possibly can in a close and cross-historical reading of the passages. We'll try to keep this no longer than, we'll try not to go any longer than about 15 minutes or so that we can devote most of our time just to discussion. And what else? And then what I'll do is I'll share the reading duties with Leah. So to start, Shakespeare for today, A Midsummer Night's Dream and the Pleasure of Oppression. Despite the dreaminess of A Midsummer Night's Dream, the play actually begins at the end of a nightmarish war of sexual conquest. As the story goes, Theseus, the Duke of Athens, has recently conquered Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, and now, as the play opens, seeks to convert that tragic history of sexual violence into the festive comedy of consensual love. Indeed, as Theseus declares to his somehow recently betrothed rape victim, Hippolyta, I wooed thee with my sword and won thy love doing thee injuries, but I will wed thee in another key with pomp, with triumph, and with reveling. Significantly, as the play illustrates, across the four interconnected plots, that festive key, that pomp, that triumph, and that reveling centers on tricking the various victims of oppression into experiencing, into seeing, feeling, and accepting their oppression as or with pleasure. This month's gathering, unfortunately our last gathering for the academic year, will focus on Shakespeare's representation of that process in several scenes. The passages are attached, and I will share those in a second. And as always, in the process of doing so, we will do our best to identify the potential ways in which the festive key of our own time, entertainment, social media, consumerism, etc., tricks us into experiencing our own oppression and the oppression of others as normal, if not acceptable, because pleasurable. So with that, I'll share my screen and I will turn things over to Leah to get us started here. Let's see. This is it. Can you all see this? Great, okay. So Leah, do you want to start us off?
Yes, I do believe you're reading Theseus though.
Am I? Okay. So, and this is in some ways, this is from in the prompt. I quote the last section of this from the prompt, but just to give you a bit more context. Theseus begins, and this is as the play begins. Now, fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. 4 happy days bring in another moon, but oh, methinks how slow this old moon wanes. She lingers my desires like to a stepdam or a dowager, long withering out a young man's revenue.
4 days would quickly steep themselves in night. 4 nights would quickly dream away the time. And then the moon, like to a silver bow, new bent in heaven, shall behold the night of our solemnities.
I think it's important quickly to mention that there is the matter of his impatience for us to consider in light of that history. Go, Philostrates, he responds. Stir up the Athenian youth to merriments. Awake the pert and nimble spirit of mirth. Turn melancholy forth to funerals. The pale companion is not for our pomp. Exunct Philostrates. And then Hippolyta, I woo thee with my sword, and won thy love doing thee injuries, but I will wed thee in another key, with pomp, with triumph, and with reveling. So go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, sorry. Just part of what we see with he's converting the sword, the injuries, into this idea that it's love. He was defeated in love, that it's something to celebrate with pomp and reveling, and that we see that in the word triumph, though, he's still considering it conquering, and he's the one who has power, and he's the one who's doing the converting of sword and injuries into love and reveling.
Right. And I think that, as you pointed out in one of our discussions, it's that merriment, that mirth, and that pomp, and how it's related to power. And that's something that I think that we would benefit from being aware of or paying attention to. So we'll move on to the next passage. So this is just to provide, this is one of the other plots. This is between the Queen and the King of the Fairies, Titania and Oberon. And this is about their specific dispute over the Indian boy. And let's think about how that's also implicated with power. They're fighting over this boy. And what is the process that they engage in, or that Oberon engages in, to try to get the Indian boy from Titania?
Oberon, give me that boy, and I will go with thee.
Not for thy fairy kingdom, fairies away, we shall chide downward if I longer stay. Exeunt Titania and her train.
Well, go thy way. Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury. My gentle Puck, come hither. Thou rememberest, since once I sat upon a promontory, and I heard a mermaid on dolphin's back, uttering such dulcet and harmonious breath, that the rude sea grew civil at her song, and certain stars shot madly from their spheres to hear the sea maid's music.
I remember.
That very time I saw, but thou couldst not, flying between the cold moon and the earth, Cupid, all armed. A certain aim he took at a fair vestal thrown by the west, and loosed his love shaft smartly from his bow, as it should pierce 100,000 hearts. But I might see young Cupid's fiery shaft quenched in the chaste beams of the watery moon, and the imperial votaress passed on, in maiden meditation fancy-free. Yet marked I where the bolt of Cupid fell. It fell upon a little western flower, before milk white, now purple with love's wound, and maidens call it love in idleness. Fetch me that flower, the herb I showed thee once. The juice of it on sleeping eyelids laid will make or man or woman madly dote upon the next live creature that it sees. Fetch me this herb, and be thou here again, ere the Leviathan can swim a league.
I'll put a girdle round about the earth in 40 minutes.
Having once this juice, I'll watch Titania when she is asleep, and drop the liquor of it in her eyes. The next thing then she waking looks upon, be it on lion, bear, or wolf, or bull, on meddling monkey, or on busy ape, she shall pursue it with the soul of love. And ere I take this charm from off her sight, as I can take it with another herb, and make her render up her page to me. And this is important because he's using this flower, this herb, to distort her sight, to distort what she can see, and through that distortion, through controlling her perception of things, to make her love something, he is then going to control her. He is then going to make her render up her little boy, the Indian boy, to him. He's going to distort her vision so that he can then put her in a place where he has power over her and can control her.
Right. And it's in that the love and idleness juice, the distortion, as Leah is pointing out, the distortion of perception. And I think one of the things that emerged for us in reading this is the implications to perception within our society, the distortion of our perceptions through various media. And we were thinking of social media in particular. Was there a question that you had in that regard, Leah?
Yeah, we did. We just had this question of like what things. One, the social media is where things can get hidden, and we only see certain parts. We only see certain snippets in social media, and it's the things that are not seen, the things that we are not shown, that they're hiding from us. And so we need to recognize and consider what things are there that are not shown. What process? What is the conversion process of the things not shown in social media that continue to promote or put us in a place where we can be controlled?
Right. So it's perception is key to us in this regard, right? And those things, and we shouldn't assume a kind of a transparency or obviousness in perception, but think about the way in which perceptions are in some ways manipulated or distorted, right? And that's the danger of, as it's presented in the play. That's the danger of the love and idleness juice as a mechanism, or I guess more a tool of distortion in the interest of power. So let's continue. Okay. So this is at the end of it all, right? This is after it is effectively worked for Oberon, and now he's looking at the effects on Titania and basically expressing or sharing his the way in which he's able to successfully appropriate or claim the Indian boy from Titania.
Advancing. Welcome, good Roman. Seest thou this sweet sight? Her dotage now I do begin to pity, for, meeting her of late behind the wood, seeking sweet favors from this hateful fool, I did upbraid her and fall out with her. For she his hairy temples then had rounded with a coronet of fresh and fragrant flowers, and that same dew, which sometimes on the buds was wont to swell like round and orient pearls, stood now within the pretty floweret's eyes, like tears that did their own disgrace bewail. When I had in my pleasure taunted her, and she in mild terms begged my patience, I then did ask of her changeling child, which straight she gave me, and her fairy sent to bear him to my bower in fairyland. And now I have the boy, I will undo this hateful imperfection of her eyes, and, gentle Puck, take this transformed scalp from off the head of this Athenian swain, that he, awaking when the other do, may all to Athens back again repair, and think no more of this night's accidents, but as the fierce vexation of a dream. But first I will release the fairy queen. Be as thou wast wont to be, see as thou wast wont to see. Dian's bud or Cupid's flower hath such force and blessed power. Now, my Titania, wake you, my sweet queen.
I think what we initially found interesting about that is the way the pleasure of oppression shifts from the oppressed to the oppressor, looking at his work in this specific instance with pleasure.
Yeah, and we just can see how he's the one with the power, and he's the one in control of his situation and in control of her, and in that he finds pleasure and joy, and he's putting her in this fairyland, in this this like fantasy, and he's controlling her through a fantasy and controlling what she sees, and at the same time making it all like a dream. So it seems kind of not real, but he's manipulating her through that fantasy and that distortion of reality. And we just kind of have to be aware of what things distort our reality and our vision and our perception.
And I think there's also the way in which that pleasure, and I'm saying from the perspective of the oppressor, that pleasure is mixed up, interestingly, with pity, right? So let's think about that. Even when we're feeling sorry, or we're feeling pity for someone in whatever horrible circumstance or situation, that's also tied up into pleasure, and tied up with pleasure and power as well. So let's move on. Now this is another one of the plots, and this is between Demetrius and Helena. She is in love with him. It is unrequited. He previously, as the text explains, he previously made love to her. We're not sure if that's physical or if that's just in terms of the wooing process not consummated in some way, but that's the way that's the description within the text. But at this point, he is refusing her advances. He's refusing her love. Who did we decide would be Demetrius?
You would be.
I would be Demetrius. Okay, so Demetrius then begins. I love thee not, therefore pursue me not. Where is Lysander and fair Hermia? The one I'll slay, the other slayeth me. And that's he wants to marry Hermia, but Hermia is betrothed to Lysander, and so he's looking for them. And she pretty much informed him that they were gonna elope, they were gonna escape and get married. Thou toldst me they were stolen unto this wood, and here am I, and would within this wood, because I cannot meet my Hermia. Let me make sure. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Meet my Hermia, hence get thee gone, and follow me no more.
You draw me, you hard-hearted adamant, but yet you draw not iron, for my heart is true as steel. Leave you your power to draw, and I shall have no power to follow you.
Do I entice you? Do I speak you fair? Or rather, do I not in plainest truth tell you, I do not, nor I cannot love you?
And even for that, I do love you the more. I am your spaniel, and Demetrius, the more you beat me, I will fawn on you. Use me but as your spaniel, spurn me, strike me, neglect me, lose me, only give me leave, unworthy as I am, to follow you. What worser place can I beg in your love, and yet a place of high respect with me, than to be used as you use your dog? Now, this is just very powerful, because we can see that Helena is enjoying being in this place of unworthiness, as she calls it, and this place of lowliness, and being under his power, and being abused by him. And unfortunately, this is something we do see in modern day situations. There are many girls who are in abusive relationships, toxic relationships, but they always go back, and they always go back because, and partly this is because unrequited love and abusive relationships are so often, they're common tropes in modern young adult movies or romantic stories, and they're kind of idolized or romanticized, and there's this fantasy and this idea that it's popular, it's cool, it's somehow pleasurable. And we can see this just in our modern social media or entertainment, and that's coloring how we accept it.
As you're saying, it's the way within entertainment, within media, that we have the distortion or the projection of these relationships that situate or that place women as victims of abuse, right? so that it is in some ways a reflection of the responsibility of so much of our media, that we have, let's say, the normalization of women as the objects of abuse, so much so that she is internalizing it and she's inviting him to abuse her, that is to treat her like his dog. So I thought that was an interesting passage. We were thinking about passages to eliminate, just to make it as short as possible, but that's one that we could not eliminate because of the way in which it represents in some ways the most disturbing way this oppressed masochistic desire of this woman for this man. And the question for us is, within the text, where does this come from? But also, more importantly, within our society, where do these images, these perceptions come from, and what are the negative effects on women generally? But I think specifically Leo was interested in the effect on girls and like young adult novel and other media. So to move on, we have Theseus, and we're nearing the end. Again, we're shifting the focus away from not the pleasure of the oppressed, but the pleasure of the oppressor. And so this is Theseus choosing to have the rude mechanicals put on their generically confused play. And he says, I will hear that play, for never anything can be amiss when simpleness and duty tender it. So bring them in and take your places, ladies.
I love not to see wretchedness overcharged and duty in his service perishing.
Oh, I'm sorry. And let me know when I'm forgetting to scroll ahead. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Why, gentle sweet, you shall see no such thing.
He says they can do nothing in this kind.
And then Theseus concludes, the kinder we, to give them thanks for nothing. Our sport shall be to take what they mistake, and what poor duty cannot do, noble respect takes it in might, not merit. Where I have come, great clerks have proposed to greet me with premeditated welcomes, where I have seen them shiver and look pale, make periods in the midst of sentences, throttle their practiced accents into their fears, and in conclusion dumbly have broke off, not paying me a welcome. Trust me, sweet, out of this silence yet I picked a welcome, and in the modesty of fearful duty I read as much as from the rattling tongue of saucy and audacious eloquence. Love, therefore, and tongue-tied simplicity in least speak most to my capacity.
And this is just important because we can see that he is enjoying their fear. He is finding their fear, their rattling tongue, their inability to perform or to speak up, and he's finding it satisfying, just as satisfying as eloquence or being able to perform well. And he's getting sort of like a power trip in the triumph and fear of the oppressed. And so we need to like consider what people in our lives have that much power over us and who are looking down on us and who have low expectations of us. And when they have low expectations, they then take pleasure when they see us fail, and who like enjoy seeing us fail.
I think that the implications, and we discussed this a bit, the pedagogical implications of it, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a kind of, if we think in terms of power, is there pleasure in witnessing the failure of people who occupy a position below you? You know, for lack of a better characterization of it, that it's interesting that he takes pleasure in their failure, because in some ways it's a reflection or confirmation of his power. And one of the terms that I threw out to perhaps capture some of this, or the elements of some of this, is it's that famous phrase, that the soft bigotry of low expectations. So that's something that I'd like for us to think about, and also think about the pedagogical implications of it. When you're in a position to help or teach, is there a pleasure that one might derive out of the witnessing or the experience of failure? And so in our last passage is at the end, when the rude mechanicals have completed their comically confused play. It's a tragedy, but it's played like a tragedy comedy, and it's generically, I should say, confused. And you have bottom, the bottom figure starting up at the end of this saying, no, assure you, the wall is down. That, oh, scroll this up. No, assure you, the wall is down that parted their fathers. Will it please you to see the epilogue or to hear a Bergamasque dance between two of our company?
No epilogue, I pray you, for your play needs no excuse, never excuse, for when the players are all dead, there needs none to be blamed. Marry, if he that writ it had played Pyramus and hanged himself in Thisby's garter, it would have been a fine tragedy, and so it is, truly, and very notably discharged. But come, your Bergomask, let your epilogue alone. A dance.
A dance. It's back to the entertainment, right? Back to the dance. And that's the way to deflect all the attention away from the power relationships in general, the power relationships, and specifically that the history that begins the play or that predates the play. That, as I said, the play actually begins at the end of a nightmarish war of sexual conquest. So it makes sense for this generically confused tragedy turned into a comedy to end with a dance, so as not to pay too attention or create the opportunity through an epilogue to bring back that history of sexual conquest.
And it is in that conversion of this war and this tragedy into a comedy with a dance that we kind of blind ourselves. We are masking the tragedy and we're choosing comedy. We're choosing to dance instead of having an epilogue, having a serious conversation about it. And it's kind of raises the question of, should we choose? It's easier to choose optimism or blind optimism, but should we make this conscious choice for a more realistic, serious study and conversation about about anything? We're the things that we're hiding, the things that get covered up, dancing and jovial jollity and revelation.
Well, to say that at this moment we're not going to dance. We're gonna have hopefully a serious and productive talk about the pleasures of oppression as we've identified it through these passages. Now, Leah, do you have a few questions to kind of bring it together or to focus our attention, just to open it up to the general discussion?
Yes, just kind of going back to what we've been talking about, one of the things that we want to consider is, what does it take to get the oppressed to see something as pleasurable or enjoyable? So what things blind us, what things numb us to the oppression so that we find it enjoyable? And possible things could be like fables, slogans, mottos, things that kind of make light of a serious situation or don't actually address the serious situation. Now there's this things, what are the struggles and the things that are not shown but are omitted, and then this omission is a conversion process that distorts reality, specifically in our day-to-day, like social media, entertainment, all of these things that can omit things and through that convert things from struggles into some kind of triumph, some kind of power trip. And we also should like consider the ways that we can protect against these blinding factors. What are ways that we can, instead of just choosing to dance, instead of just choosing to have a comedic ending to everything, but to actually address what is being hidden, what is being covered up, and what is being omitted, so that we can have a serious conversation about it. And then finally, what are the places, what are the things, the people that have that power, that have that power to control the oppression? It can be found in education systems, the head of the education system, just the curriculum itself, or government or company the people in charge most of the time, but we just need to consider what areas we can find this in today's society.
Great. Who'd like to jump in?
I'll just jump in quickly and say thank you so much for bringing this discussion and for your presentation and for your questions, Leah. When you asked the first question, I get so like off track because I've got all these ideas going on, but I don't think you mentioned popular music. Did you in your, how do we sort of perpetuate these things? And I was thinking of popular music in particular because I was listening yesterday to Robert Cray. You guys may or may not know Robert Cray's music, but it's often about heartbreak. And often, he's singing songs where, he's kind of the bad guy. And yet because, he's the one who like lured the married woman, or he's the one who did somebody wrong, but he's singing the songs in a way that, sort of positions himself as the one who deserves our our concern or our admiration in some ways. I mean, juxtaposed with songs where he's the one who's been heartbroken, so that's part of it. But really my thought was just that popular music has so much influence today over all of us that I think that's a way that these things are perpetuated.
And music is also powerful because it can be so easily just streamed anywhere. You can just hear it passing through a mall or anywhere, and it's just going to subconsciously be introduced into you. You get to choose. So that's a very powerful part that definitely perpetuates the power.
I was also thinking about in terms of, and as I said, along the way, in terms of pedagogical philosophy, for instance, and I think that this is something, pedagogical philosophy and practice, and I think that this is something that is a particular challenge in literary studies, and that the popular orientation to literary studies, I think, or let's say the teaching of literature is pleasure orientation. That is, that we usually seek to identify students who already love to read or enjoy reading, and then there's the pressure to continue that or to perpetuate that in the classroom or as a part of the educational process. And I've always identified how what happens in Leah. I could speak to this because she took my Shakespeare class devoted to poetry and tragedy. But what happens when that pleasure orientation to reading clashes with the reading of a disturbing text, like The Rape of Lucrece, for instance. And it's even, as we've pointed out, it's even contained within the comedies. What happens to, how do you teach a comedy like A Midsummer Night's Dream that is engaged in this process of trying to convert the history of rape into a comedy of consensual love? And so that's always been for me a pedagogical challenge, because I don't want to be a part of perpetuating this romanticizing or this mystification of sexual abuse or of oppression or unhealthy and immoral relationships. But the pressure is so, as the dominant form of pedagogy, to just to satisfy students, so to speak, by giving them their expectations of their pleasure-oriented expectations of a Shakespearean text or of literature more broadly. Even now, I'm teaching, or I just finished teaching the Heart of Darkness, Conrad's Heart of Darkness, in my Intro to Literature course, and attempting to engage students in a question or a discussion about language itself, poetic language or figurative language specifically, and what do you do with Conrad's use of the N-word? for instance, and what question does that raise about our expectations of literature, our understanding of literature within our culture, within our society more broadly, so that pleasure is a pedagogical challenge and a pedagogical problem. And so I see what we're trying to do is develop a critical awareness of the power implicit in pleasure. So that's my reflection. Anything about, for instance, as social media, Leah, in terms of your experience, and I was interested in what you said about young adult literature in the effect on girls.
Yeah, so one thing especially that I notice in young adult literature, such as novels, romance novels, there is an almost scary amount of romanticization and popularity in abusive or unhealthy relationships. And some people will call it out, but it's still popular, and it's a common trope, the bad boy being the one who gets the good girl. And it's kind of just seen as, and it also is kind of seen as the girl is saving the guy. So there's like this idea of this honor in like this honorable part of being in such a relationship. Like you get to save him. And so there's just like this romanticization of it that distorts girls when they're in a very vulnerable place too, because young girls are still figuring out just how their relationships, and then they're getting bombarded with these ideas that the bad boys are fun, the bad boys are cooler, and it's popular. And so it's just kind of a scary thing because these things just become really embedded in your mind, and you can't escape it very easily in today's social media and literature world. And the thing is, it's also perpetuated in social media, not just young adult literature. And also some things from social media that specifically personally hit me is just like this idea of ideal types of beauty and ideal types of body, and this idea also of starving yourself often, and this idealization of enjoying, like nothing tastes as good as being skinny. That's a slogan or motto. So, and lots of girls starve themselves because of that. And they're enjoying it because they're thinking, oh yeah, being skinny tastes better than food. And so they're enjoying this oppression and this starvation, which is in the end, eating disorders are one of the most dangerous and most fatal diseases out there for young girls. And it's just because there's this idea that it's good for you, it's what you're supposed to be like, and then you get complimented and praised for it on social media, and that's kind of like a bad cycle. So like I just feel like there are a lot of things in social media like that can really control how you behave and how you take oppression and take suffering.
May I add on to that?
Yeah.
I think it's because of the attention that most people get from these type of things, why people might go out their way to try getting that or force themselves to like that type of thing. Like in particular, I guess a female likes the bad boy because everybody wants to be with a bad boy. You know, it gets likes, gets people's eyes, and you get compliments all the time. So I feel like our social norm or whatever, because of social media, everybody does things for basically attention. And like for eating disorders, everybody wants to be skinny. Everybody wants to be appealing to everybody. And sometimes people just do it just for the attention, just so they can say they have an eating disorder. So nothing is really organic. It's more like what others think.
I think what's so key to what you've said is attention, likes, eyes, right? It's all about that, the perception and how we're perceived and projected, our sense of how people are seeing us. And that may be how true or imagined is that, but it's our sense of how we're being seen is so much part of the challenge, the challenge for us. And we're obviously it's not to say that we're more visual than any other period, but it's in some ways, it's a kind of, how should I characterize this? It's like, this hyper sense of perception of visibility, right? On the various social media platforms, whether, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or whatever the platform is. It's like we're so, and I think what captures it, and it just dawned on me, is that we are all kind of in some ways equipped or empowered to be photographers, right? To take and project images. And what does that say about us? How has that transformed us socially? That I remember when it was a big deal to have a camera, right? And to take pictures and to get pictures developed, right? And remember when the Polaroid was this incredible innovation, like an instant photograph. What does it mean that we can take pictures of incredible quality instantly, right? And what is the effect on perception? But I think it's importantly the distortion of our perceptions, how we see ourselves, how we project ourselves, how we see and understand the world. And I just feel as if it's kind of a sci-fi kind of matrix kind of situation that we find ourselves in. It's like, I really don't, the more that we depend on, and of course it's all, what's ironic about all of this is that we're on Zoom, right? But I've seen that so much of our understanding and experiencing of the world is in some ways channeled through, perhaps distorted through social media, through some form of media. And I'm just like, I have these moments where I'm like, this is not real. Like our perception, our engagement with the world is not real. And who is taking incredible advantage of this is the mainstream media, right? It's just like, it's what they determine needs to be our particular obsession becomes our obsession. And it's this kind of repetitive process, whereas you have to, however it is you manage it online, whether it's just turning off the television, right? Because there was that period, and I think for all of us, just the adjustment to COVID and the way in which we then empowered, because of obviously the newness of it all, we empowered the media to pretty much shape our images and our perspectives, our understanding of COVID and the world. And it was just this obsession with death. And it just got to the point where I couldn't take it, and my mind could not bear it anymore. I had to just turn it off. And it's not to say I don't recognize the incredible challenges, the dangers of COVID, but I don't need the kind of the repetition and the way in which it distorts as I step outside of my house after in some ways being indoctrinated with it effectively having the love and idleness juice or the death in COVID juice sprinkled over my eyes. And I go outside and it's like I'm seeing everything through this COVID lens. So I think that is something for us to take into consideration, to really think about how our perceptions get so, and I'll say distorted, but that's not to say that all perception is a matter of some sort of construction, or you might even say a distortion. But so I'm deliberately saying distortion with the negative characterization of it. But just the sensitivity to how the media informs and various forms of entertainment, and I see it as kind of I see it as a form of ugly entertainment, right? Because that's what motivates the media, profit driven as it is, and so it's a kind of an entertainment logic that governs it, though it's in some way trafficking in fear, right? Of anger, of of hatred. The way, and I'm thinking about this as well in terms of the unproductive conversation or discussion or representation of race within our society. You know, it becomes so much of it pivots on the pornography of Black misery, you know, and the assumptions about how Black people see themselves or feel within this world. And I was like, that's not my reality. That is this kind of distortion that you're amplifying and you're perpetuating so that I live my life seeing myself in a certain way and engaging with people like me or unlike me in a specific way. And it's about the distortion of perceptions in the interest of power or control.
Kind of just going off of that, every time lately that I open up my Instagram app, it starts off in the search section with a picture saying "Stop Asian Hate." And personally, I'd never really, fortunately, had to experience anything explicitly bad just because I was Asian. But it makes me kind of feel like I should, like I am a victim in some sense, even though I've not. And it's successfully kind of distorting my own perception of myself. And we can just see how our identity can so easily be changed and swept up by what social media or anything just tells us that we should feel, or even if it doesn't explicitly say you should feel like a victim or you should feel hated, but just as a "Stop Asian Hate." Okay, am I supposed to be getting hate? If I'm not, am I not seen as Asian? And then it's just like this weird controlling and manipulation of how I perceive myself. And they have the power over my own perception of myself, and they shouldn't have that right, but they shouldn't have that position. But it's still something that we have to be on the lookout for, just because it's so easily just embedded in there, kind of almost innocently, but it's very powerful.
I think
Karma, that's how to pronounce your name, Karma,
yeah.
right? I think I was just thinking of something that you said earlier, and perhaps you wanted to continue with that. Is what you said about the perception of others. So Leah, it's how you perceive yourself as Asian and then as a victim. But it's also Stop Asian Hate. The possible effect is to how you think other people perceive you, right? Do other people perceive you as a victim? Is that the assumption that you're supposed to make, right? So it's your self-perception, but it's also what you think or how you feel or how you perceive other people perceiving you. And then what that does is, in some ways, it makes it really difficult to engage in conversations, relationships, because that's already shaping that interaction, right? And it's not to say that, it's like, it's kind of, it's to me, so these kinds of hashtags are weird to me. It's like, Stop Asian Hate. It's like, well, obviously I'm not for Asian hate, but what does it mean to stop Asian hate? I'd like to think in what I do as an instructor in some ways is creating a critical awareness to contribute to this, to contribute to stopping Asian hate. But it's just like, so I'm like, what is the function of the hashtag itself? Like, what do you, and I guess what I'm getting at, Leah, is what do you do with that? What do you do with that? But Kama had a point. I wanted to let Kama get in with the point.
I also want to say what you had to say about when you have to turn on the TV or whatever. I feel like for like most adults and I guess teenagers and any age, I guess, we rely on like the media and news for information. So the fact that they had to like overpound us with like all this extra stuff like COVID this, COVID that, or whatever, we kind of like can't really escape it since we actually rely on it to like what's the forecast, what's going on in the world, you know?
But if you think about it, what's going on in the world? Can we really trust them to tell us what's really going on in the world? And it's like what they're presenting. To what extent is what they present to us just a matter of a distortion that serves their interest and not our interest, and that we can't make the assumption that the two coincide. But we're limited. I agree. It's like, how do we determine, suspicious as we are to the way in which, so much is distorted? It's like, what processes do we go through to develop as, let's say, clear, full, and responsible a sense of what, let's say, in quotations, reality is? Like, what is real? That's my matrix moment. It's like, what is real, right? So Ruth, do you have something to say?
Well, I was just wondering and thinking about what Leah was saying too, and getting to the issue of what people who are doing the oppression might get out of it. And I was wondering if, like, the hashtags make me feel okay because I'm not hating Asians, without getting to a root cause of a problem, right? So sometimes, like, I think, we're encouraged to, give to food banks and things, or dine out, and some of your money goes to an AIDS charity, which I get to feel good as I'm eating out, but it doesn't really address the problem. And so I can feel like a really good person at the same time. And it looks like we're doing something, but we're not, because the root cause of it, right? And I can protest against police violence, which I should, and I do, but the police are part of a larger structure that has a problem, that if I'm just focusing on just the one institution, I don't know how that would resolve it. So I'm interested in the question of what the oppressor gets out of it as well. And even some of the things that look like you're against the oppression, but maybe not really.
Leah, did you want to follow up?
Well, that is a very important point that I hadn't honestly considered quite to that extent. And it is, because it's so easy to accept what social media tells us, because that's kind of, or any source of entertainment or information, because we kind of feel like we have to get our information from somewhere. And then it's a very powerful effect, because it can really, how we feel, like we can feel like we're good people, and we can feel like it doesn't apply to us, and then sort of we're kind of converting that same oppression into something where we feel good. It's something that we can have, practically tragedy to comedy. We're feeling like we're converting without actually addressing it. And so it's like this easy way out, in a sense. But it's really important to, like, even become aware of that. So I'm like, I didn't even really become aware of that, but that's a very good point, because it's so hard to not even notice that we're not actually addressing the situation or the oppression, and we're instead just converting it. So we have to become really hyper aware and critically aware of how we're being manipulated, or how we're being controlled, or just being influenced by influencers and all these social media and entertainment mediums.
It raises for me the question of how constitutive to our identities as, like, let's say, relatively privileged, empowered, and people, how constitutive to our identities is the existence of the oppressed, right? And I think that's what Ruth is getting at. What would happen to us if we eliminated the problem of police-involved violence, or of poverty, or of whatever crisis situation affecting a particular group? And I think for a lot of people, and this is obviously functioning not entirely on a conscious level, it's way too constitutive of their identities, their sense of who they are, as feeling in some ways empowered. So to feel empowered to do something is about your power. right? And it might be implicated in perpetuating the problems. You really want to give up that power to do something? And in some ways, I'm talking about, as I've experienced, as I've thought about it, just white liberal racism, and the way in which I've often been locked in these kinds of struggles with folks trying to put me in this kind of needy, desperate position. And then when I make it very clear that I'm not a victim, I'm a liberated, well-adjusted, relatively happy Black man, then the white liberal friends disappear because of the inability to establish some sort of a power dynamic that is a position to help me with whatever perceived oppression that I might be going through. Now, I'm not saying that I don't experience that. Interestingly, that is a form of oppression that I have to contend with, right? But it shows me that perceiving me as oppressed and needy is more important to them than it is a representation of my, I guess, my perceived and my real existence. So that, I think, is a challenge in terms of the pleasure that we get out of oppression from the perspective of the oppressor. And I think that's why it was so interesting and important in the play that we have the representation of Theseus's pleasure in, or let's say Oberon's pleasure in watching Titania and Theseus's pleasure in watching the rude mechanicals. It works both ways. It works both ways. Any other comments, questions, any issues we didn't touch on? No? We've exhausted this, we're thoroughly satisfied.
Well, I mean, but the big question is, how do we stop it? I mean, how do I stop? I don't know how to, because I wonder about that sometime that you were just talking about when is it an honest offering up of assistance? I mean, isn't that kind of I'm not a philosophy major. I wish I knew more about philosophy, about, everything I do, even when I'm trying to do something for somebody else, it makes me feel good, but that doesn't negate that I was trying to do something good for the other person. So when is it that it's a problem and when is it okay?
I would say, who is the other person?
Yeah.
Right? Who is the other person? Is that a matter of your perception, or a more complex process of how that person is representing him or herself?
Yeah.
It's always, there's no place outside of perception, right?
No.
Representation.
Yeah.
But
outside of it. Yeah.
As I tell my students, especially in the intro to lit course, always be aware of who's perceiving, who's representing at any particular moment in the text. There isn't a representation of a character, especially when you have different perspectives representing that character. So I think it's just to be mindful of, as I said, to be mindful of who are you helping? Who is that person? Is that the person that you've constructed in a particular way?
Or is it the real person?
Or is it the real person as the real person as defined by a more complex process of actually
knowing,
paying attention to who that person is, how that person sees or perceives himself? Because as I said, when I make it clear that I don't share your perception, your projection, your imposition on me, that's usually when the white liberal friends who are wanting to be white saviors That's when they just fade away. I can't, in other words, I can't exist as I am to
Right.
them because it doesn't suit their, the needs of their identities as white saviors.
So it's about seeing people not as just a reflection of my need, but as them as real individual people.
I agree with that.
Is that good? Yeah. I don't know if I can always get around that, but I'm going to work on that. I'm going to try on that.
Of course, I mean,
Yeah.
we it's not obviously easy because, as I said, it's a matter
Yeah.
of perception, right? So
Yeah.
so even who that person really is a matter of representation and perception. So there
Right.
is, so it's not an easy process. Now I don't teach my I don't teach my students. I don't focus on my students' answers as much as an appreciation for the processes and respecting that we'll have to make decisions. We'll have to come up with certain conclusions and arrive at certain answers. But if you respect the difficulty of the process, respecting the difficulty of the process is what's most important. That's where the work is, and it's continuous. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
Right. And if you approach it honestly in that regard, you can't really be faulted too much for falling short, because we will all fall short, because these are really difficult goals to achieve.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So we are all out of time. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful experience for me. I apologize. We just couldn't, because of just the difficulties of just the year plus under COVID, because of Leah and her schedule was in part affected by that as a student athlete. So it was impossible to do all four for this semester. But so I appreciate the time that you've taken. The energy that you put into the Shakespeare for Today gatherings. This is something that we are committed to, and as long as Leah is willing, and if we can recruit other students, then it's something that we will certainly continue. But again, thank you all for the time. Leah, any parting words?
Just thank you so much for being here. It's been a really great opportunity for me to just be able to talk about this with everybody. And I love that you guys that you show up and that you have things that you converse and that you have these conversations with us. And I'm just really grateful for this opportunity. So thank you.
On that note,
thank y'all.
Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank y'all.
Have a nice one.
Take care. Thank you.